Good morning, everyone. I'm Amreshwar Pathak. It gives me immense pleasure to extend to you all a very warm welcome on behalf of Department of Law, Prestige Institute of Management and Research. I am thankful to our institute for organizing this webinar on legal implication of COVID-19 with special reference to performance of contract in corporate sector. Today we have amongst us Miss Soumya Bhargava ma'am, associate at DSK Legal, one of the top 10 law firms of India. Before DSK Legal, ma'am worked as an associate at Heyman's High Associate, Mumbai, one of the top 10 law firms of India. We welcome you, ma'am. The positive thinker sees the invisible, feels the intangible, and achieves the impossible. With this quote, I request Ms. Soumya Bhargava, ma'am, to kindly take over the session.
Thank you. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. I'm just going to share this presentation and we'll just start. Before that, I just hope everybody is safe and healthy in their houses because of such pandemic that's happening.
Yes, ma'am, we are.
So I'm going to be talking about the legal implications of COVID-19 on corporate sector. Okay, so just before we begin, as you know, my name is Soumya Bhargava. I'm an associate at DSK Legal. Just to give a give a background about the firm that I work in. My firm, basically, the practice areas of my firm are corporate and M&A, real estate, insolvency, and bankruptcy, media and entertainment, basically everything under the sun. I work in the corporate and M&A team. We do due diligences, contracts, commercial contracts, agreements, basically whichever things are involved in the corporate and M&A sector is what we deal in. So if you guys have any questions on corporate and M&A as a sector, if you guys are inclined towards corporate and M&A, do you want to have it? You have any questions on that? We'll just quickly discuss that and maybe then we can start up the presentation. All right, so we can actually begin. So the topic is legal implications of COVID-19 on corporate sector. Now, as we know, COVID-19, WHO had declared COVID-19 as a pandemic and thousands of patients were affected, and throughout the world is experiencing an unprecedented time where, you know, everything is just coming to a standstill and factories are getting shut and basically all the offices are working from home. Everything is come to a standstill where, you know, the economy is suffering. On the world economy, the world is heading towards a recession. So that's why it's very important to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on the world and how the world is struggling to come out with it. Now, as we know, China, it started from China, and China is actually now finally recovering after coming back from, you know, the impact of COVID-19. Right from November, it's been struggling and there have been lockdowns throughout the country. And we've actually, India as a country has actually learned from the mistakes made by China as well as Italy and France, and see how their conditions are being. And thousands of patients are being affected, quarantined. So this is how, this is the best preventive measure that we can take. Social distancing is the method that we can take to prevent this, this pandemic to stop and basically continue with our lives further on. There have been lockdowns throughout the world now. India has taken initiative to implement the lockdown in a very aggressive manner as compared to other countries. See, for example, in the country of United States, there the lockdown is still not mandatory. The essential services are still functioning. People are allowed to go and roam around in parks and public spaces. So this is how India as a country, I feel that we are a little bit of more aggressive towards preventing this pandemic and realizing the aggressive mistakes which have been done by other countries, and this is how we're implementing the lockdown. Now, there have been travel bans, as you know, international and domestic airports have been shut. There have been state borders which have been sealed. Health advisories are being issued. Your hygiene and these kind of things are being given utmost importance. So things like that have been happening in the world. And India as a country, I think, has been taking a lot of efforts despite some social upheaval that keeps on happening. Like, for example, in the city of Indore as well as Delhi, things have been happening. So things like that are also doing. Now, why we are discussing about the impact on the world as well as the fact that COVID-19 has had an impact on the world is not just it has also had an impact on the companies and the corporations and businesses, basically. So that's what we're going to talk about in the next slide. You guys can see the presentation, right?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yeah. Okay. So now COVID-19 has been throughout through video conferencing, things like that. So we're trying to ensure continuity of businesses. We're trying to ensure, just one second, I think the internet connection is, you guys can hear me, right? Hello? 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 Can you guys hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, cool. So COVID-19 impact on companies. Now it's not just that we're facing problems throughout the world on an individual basis. It's also amongst the companies that are trying to ensure continuity, how people are going to ensure that even after coming out of COVID-19, they're not incurring huge losses. And the best method they're trying to implement is to prevent as much loss as possible. So this is what the COVID-19 impact has had on companies. Everything has come to a standstill. Now, basically, if we categorize the industries into two parts, manufacturing industry as well as the service industry. If you look at the manufacturing industry, which is the companies which manufactures essential as well as non-essential items, factories which manufactures things like clothes, like example being H&M, Zara, things like that. Now, factories which are manufacturing clothes, garments, non-essential items have been essentially shut. So, and if in fact, I was just reading an article yesterday that factories, the garment industry in India itself, just in India, 1 trillion rupees loss is going to be incurred because of impact on COVID-19. So this is the kind of impact that we're expecting out of just one industry, the garment industry, where the loss has been impacted because of such a pandemic. So this is kind of a huge deal, and this is how people are expecting losses to be incurred. But the only thing is that we need to prevent as much loss as possible, because ultimately it does impact the economy of our country as well as the economy of the world. And the World Bank has already pronounced the fact that because of COVID-19, the world is heading towards a recession. So this is how bad the condition is. not just on an individual basis because we're staying at home, but also on companies which have been struggling to find ways to, ensure business continuity. So this is what the impact has been. There have been supply chain disruptions, factories manufacturing non-essential items are being shut. Now, the only thing is that the factories which are manufacturing are in the manufacturing sector. They have migrant workers as well as temporary workers, as well as, casual workers, things like that, which have been happening. And because of the factories being shut, the daily breadwinners, where casual workers on a daily basis, they used to get daily wage, their salaries and everything is going to be very impacted, because they used to earn on a daily basis and their daily wage used to go into their bread and butter. So this is how employee disruption has also happened. Employee disruption in the manufacturing sector has hit the most. When it comes to the service sector meaning that, where us, like law firms, on just, you have to draft agreements, everything can happen online. If at all there has to be negotiations, if at all there has to be, discussions, that can be possible through Zoom or through video conferencing, through calls. So work from home policies have been implemented by the companies. Employee disruption has hit a lot to a major extent. However, service sector is still implementing and still coming out of this pandemic and trying to prevent the major losses as much as possible. Third is crisis management, which are the initiatives taken by the company. Now, what it means is crisis management. Now, this is definitely a crisis for companies, how business continuity is to go on, right? Companies are trying to make initiatives like, for example, work from home policy. Then again, now you will be reading under Companies Act. Once you read the Companies Act, you'll understand this concept of corporate social responsibility. Now, corporate social responsibility is basically that every company, based on a certain threshold, certain companies are mandatorily they're obligated to give a certain amount of their profits towards corporate social responsibility, towards their society, towards rural areas, social causes like education, implementation, like building of schools, sanitization, everything basically, to improve the society. So certain companies have already donated 50 crores, 100 crores towards the pandemic in order to, prevent the impact of COVID-19. So this is how companies have been taking initiatives. Like, for example, Tata Sons have already donated 100 crores towards COVID-19 prevention and, implementation of medical kits, things like that. So this is how companies have been taking efforts towards their corporate social responsibility. Now, on governance continuity, any material adverse effect on operations of companies due to COVID-19 outbreak, including suspension of or operations of factories, should be disclosed. Now, this is basically in case of listed entities. Now, listed entities are the companies whose shares are listed on stock exchanges, Bombay Stock Exchange, National Stock Exchange, and there have been other local stock exchanges as well. So share, as you know, as many of you may know who basically do share trading, listed entities are companies whose shares are listed on the stock exchanges. So there, the listed entities have a certain obligation towards the public shareholders that you need to disclose certain things. The company needs to disclose certain things to the shareholders, the public shareholders, in order for them to decide if they want to trade the shares or not. So things like that, like material adverse effect, like factories are being shut. Now, HUL, Hindustan Unilever, has shut down their non-essential businesses. The factories temporarily. The suspension of such operation of factories will also result in incurring of losses for the next quarter or so, right? So this is how the companies are being affected, and there is an additional obligation on the listed entities to disclose certain these kind of things in order for public shareholders to decide whether they want to invest in that share or not. So this is how governance continuity under Companies Act and SEBI regulations come into picture, where SEBI regulations mandate you that you need to disclose the fact that you're terminating such and such employee, or your key material contracts are being terminated, things like that. So there have been additional disclosures which are to be made by listed entities in such cases as well. Also, we'll just try to make this more interactive. So in case you have any questions, please stop me and then we can discuss, right? You guys have any questions on this? So should we go ahead?
पेरिस्कोप है हमें ऐसा लग रहा है
Ma'am.
Yeah.
Excuse me, ma'am. Can you hear me?
इसका सिंबल
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah, okay. So I was wondering about the specific industries that would, really get affected by the aftermath of the virus, like oil is going down, and yeah, like certain sectors of healthcare would be vanished, to say the least, and like travel would be impacted. But like, what else do you believe that would have a tremendous impact?
See, as far as two verticals that are being concerned, where you can divide verticals into manufacturing as well as sector, service sector, it's the manufacturing sector which is going to be impacted the most. Of course, now companies will ensure that after this lockdown everything is over. Now we're just not expecting the lockdown to be over by 15th April. We're just statisticians, everything is expecting them to get over by mid-May. So this is how companies are now planning their budgets and their annual budgets and everything basis the impact that is being incurred in this quarter. So this is how people are going to be impacted. Now we're also going to come across in the next slide, we're going to talk about the companies different verticals, like real estate, what will happen, licenses, what will happen, employees, what will happen, things like that. So I'll just be covering that in the next slide.
All right. Thank you.
So this is the impact of COVID-19 on each of the verticals, again inside the company. Now in a company, what goes in is basically every other vertical: marketing, sales.
We're gonna make a decision sooner or later.
We have time.
We don't.
Hello? Yeah. So impact of COVID-19 has had on all the verticals of the companies, and how it has happened is, now first coming on to corporate and compliances, the first hexagon that you can see is corporate or compliances, how it is being impacted. Now compliances under Companies Act, like board meeting. Now you will read under the Companies Act that the company has to minimum hold a company. Hello?
Soumya ma'am, this is Arjit here. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah, no problem.
Ma'am, actually we have amongst us Dr. Anil Bajpai sir and Dr. Nishan Joshi sir. They have joined the session. Dr. Anil Bajpai is our Chief Operating Officer, and he's involved in management. He's part of management team of our college. And Dr. Nishan Joshi sir is our in charge of Department of Law. So I just wanted to bring to your notice that they have also joined the session, and they are observing your session. So welcoming.
Hi, good morning, sir. I hope you guys are doing well.
Thank you so much.
All right, so to come back to the presentation, now impact of COVID-19 has had on various verticals of the company. everything is being impacted now. I'm just going to go through, just let you guys go through each of the verticals and how COVID-19 has had an impact. Now, on corporate and compliances, if you look at the first hexagon, is on the compliances as a company secretary. Now, a lot of you guys would be doing company secretary course as well, or maybe thinking of doing company secretary course. If you're inclined towards corporate law, I would suggest, I mean, this is on a very separate note, but I would suggest that you guys go through, at least explore the option of company secretary and see, you know, additional compliances which are there under Companies Act, SEBI regulations. Just start going through so that you guys have also built in the interest of corporate law, you know, while you're studying law throughout these 5 years. So coming back to the presentation again, on corporate and compliances, now under the Companies Act, you will read that the Companies Act mandates a company to hold a board meeting at least 4 times in 1 year. And shareholders meeting has to be held at least once in a year. So now what the companies are doing is that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, which is the ministry, ultimate ministry, which is responsible for functioning of the companies, their MCA has relaxed the requirement for holding for at least 4 meetings. And the Companies Act also mandates the companies to hold these board meetings within a time gap of 120 days. So things like that have been relaxed. Now, a lot of statutory regulatory bodies like companies, Ministry of Corporate Affairs, then SEBI, IRDA, things like that are relaxing the, you know, which are necessary, relaxing the requirements for companies so that they can function in this unprecedented time that we're all facing, that they at least don't fall foul of these mandatory requirements. So when you have that mandatory requirement of holding at least 4 board meetings, that has been dispensed away with. And even if you don't, you know, fulfill this requirement of holding at least 4 board meetings or within a gap of 120 days, things like that. Yeah, so that's how Ministry of Corporate Affairs and SEBI are also relaxing the requirements which have been imposed on the companies. Now, coming to material contracts, we're also going to discuss this in more details, which the presentation is on the material contracts, how contracts are being, you know, impacted because of COVID-19. So I'm going to touch upon that later. When it comes to real estate companies, where companies are dealing with real estate properties like Godrej Properties, which does commercial properties in and out. I mean, they deal in residential and commercial properties. So that so Godrej Properties or companies like India Bulls, things like that, are facing the adverse effect of COVID-19 in terms of the fact that real estate prices are going down, and the companies which had launched residential projects as well as commercial projects are also being adversely affected because public right now is saving as much as possible, stocking up essentials, hoarding up things, and real estate prices are really going down. And the projects which were launched in the last few months that have been really negatively impacted. So these companies are hoping that once lockdown is over, everything is going to be back to normal. However, it is going to take time. So this is how the real estate sector has been impacted. Now, coming on to human resources, which are your employees. Employees are, I must say that have been impacted quite a bit, where again, in the manufacturing sector where factory workers were there, their factories have been shut. And amongst the factory workers, the temporary or the migrant workers are the most affected because their wages were dependent on a daily basis, right? So employees and workmen are affected, but Ministry of Human Resources have also issued an advisory note that you guys need to take into consideration this pandemic and the fact that your factories are not running. That cannot be an excuse for you to terminate the employees. So that is one of the really appreciable notifications that has come in for human resources. And that's again an advisory which they can issue to private establishments, to companies saying that you should not terminate your employees while these things are happening. So this is how human resources have also been affected. Now coming to service industry is basically where you are providing services and not manufacturing things, right? So these are service industries where let's say, again, for law firm purposes, we're doing everything online and we're working from home. So this is how employees have been affected, and human resource teams have been continuously getting in touch with us to improve and spread awareness about hygiene issues, things like that, and health, mental health, everything. So this is how human resources overall has been impacted. Coming on to litigations, again, now litigations since court, Supreme Court, High Court, tribunals, everything has been I wouldn't say shut, but all that your, they've given a direction that your Supreme Court, High Court, and tribunals will only hear the urgent matters, that too on a video conference. And the filing for new cases has been made. They're shut right now. And this is how the litigations have been impacted. So there will be delay in litigations where companies were expecting, companies are always expect in their accounting treatment that certain amount, if they think that the order is going to be favorable, they will account for that amount in the balance sheet as a notional profit or notional loss, whatever. So this is how the loss or the profit will be impacted in terms of litigations. Now there will be delay in litigations where urgent matters are there. Everybody is trying to juggle between everything. The Supreme Court judges are holding video conferences with the advocates. So this is how litigations have been affected. Not just litigation lawyers have also been affected by that. It's just that every litigation lawyer is keeping ready with their briefs. The drafting is almost, everything is done. However, the conferences, the briefing with counsels, things like that have come to a standstill. So this has impacted litigation lawyers a lot. Corporate and M&A sector, not so much. The deals are still on fire. People who were expecting to finish deals by 31st March are still on track, and things like that have been happening. So corporate and M&A sector has not impacted so much. Now coming on to the licenses and permits. Now, as you know, every manufacturing sector would require tons and hundreds of licenses, like licenses under the Factories Act, labor laws, industrial disputes, everything. So licenses and permits, now it will be difficult for a company which is just starting to set up a sector, a manufacturing unit, a service sector, to obtain licenses and permits right now, because the government departments are working on a 50% work capacity. This is how license in permissions, things like that. So this is how on each and every vertical of a company, COVID-19 has had a negative impact. And so suddenly, it started from November in China, and of course we did predict that it will come to India. However, with this kind of impact, and this impact is global. This impact on all the verticals is applicable throughout the world. It's not just India where licenses and permit litigations, human resources are being affected like this. This is throughout the world. Now coming on to contracts. Now, since the presentation is with specific reference to contracts, I know you guys have studied the Contract Act. You guys know the definition of contract under the Contract Act. This is the basic question. And I think every first year student should know the definition of contract under the Contract Act, because it's the most easiest definition. So would you guys know? Or if you guys want to explain contracts, just, out of your own reference, and you just want to paraphrase it, what is a contract?
Please make
Excuse me,
it
ma'am.
interactive, everyone. As ma'am is asking you certain questions, you can, involve
Yes, sir.
yourself in answering the question.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Hi.
Uh, Ma'am, can you hear me? This is Utkarsh
Yeah, I
Joshi.
can hear you.
Okay. So I was referring to the last previous slide that you were going through, specifically the M&A side. What I believe is into M&A, it
How much?
brings up a lot of upside. You know, like in America, interest rates have dropped and everything, and people not being liquid, it creates certain panic. So
Correct.
I, so the way it affects M&A is the interest rates dropping, so you can get better cheap finance. And on the other hand, the seller side, if you are acquiring, that is, if you are the buyer, so you get better terms with the seller, which creates a real upside for anyone who's into M&A right now.
Right, that's correct. The only thing is that you'll have to see how the mergers are being structured, because a lot of companies would be going under insolvency because they would be
Yes.
going bankrupt, and this is how your insolvency and bankruptcy code also comes into picture, where people are estimating the fact that your companies, a lot of companies will go under insolvency under the IBC. However, under the IBC, what you need to know about insolvency bankruptcy code over here is the fact that companies which will go under insolvency always have an opportunity to be acquired by healthy companies. I will say healthy
Exactly.
companies, like how they're financially healthy, how they're
Yes.
financially being stable and even able to come out of it. So of course, mergers and amalgamations will happen. I mean, there may be a slowdown. We just have to actually see how companies interpret this. And in the kind of frustrating time this is, everybody is right on track. I mean, the days that we are working on, everyone is on fire, and
Yeah.
people are ensuring that this is not
I'm sorry, there's a connection issue. Can't hear you anymore.
affecting in
Hello.
because COVID-19 or pandemic like this. So this is how mergers and amalgamation also being impacted.
Yeah. So do you do specialize into M&A, right?
Right.
Yeah. So after the session, can you go through a little bit into the due diligence and everything?
Yeah, of course. I
Don't
mean,
mind?
due diligence is a topic which we can discuss, and this is a very elaborate topic because it will require a lot of discussions. But of course, we can touch upon it, and then we can just wrap it up in 5 minutes, and then we can see.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, coming to the essentials of contracts. Does anybody know what the essentials of contract are?
Yes, ma'am. It is given in Section 10 of Indian Contract Act 1872.
Can't hear you. I'm sorry.
Ma'am, it is given in Section 10 of Indian Contract Act 1872.
Right. And what does it say?
And it says that there should be agreement and acceptance. The agreement should have some type of qualities that just like ma'am, what
Hello,
I say,
ma'am. Hello. Could you hear me, ma'am? Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Ma'am, actually, in section 10, it is like there should be a lawful object and there should be a lawful consideration and with enforceability of
Correct.
law.
Correct. So
And there's also the free consent of the
that's
parties
correct.
also.
Right. There should be free consent, there should be
Of the
lawful
parties.
object, there should be lawful consideration, free consent, offer and acceptance. Most important is that the first party should give an offer and the second party should accept it. And there should be free consent for both the things, offer as well as acceptance. Now, these are the basic essentials of contracts. And contract is, as what's defined under the Contract Act, is an agreement enforceable by law, right? Because one person is giving an offer saying that you buy an apple from me for 10 rupees for one apple. I mean, it's a very hypothetical example. And the other person will say, yes, I will buy one apple for you for 10 rupees. So that is how you are offering, and then the second person is accepting on the same terms and conditions which you are offering, right? So this is how contracts work. Now, coming back to the fact that how would impact of COVID-19 be on contracts? All material contracts where it is not possible to perform the obligations is going to be affected. Now, there are two things. One is on impossibility of performance of contract, and second is on hardship, which is going to be done on performance of contract. So impossibility versus hardship. Like hardship will not include that, will not mean that the contract is impossible to perform, right? Under certain conditions like this pandemic, only for certain industries, I would say that the contract is impossible to perform. And for certain industries, I would say that it is, of course, hard to operate in this pandemic. However, it is not impossible to perform the contract. So this is what the difference is, and this is what we need to know and need to analyze to assess whether the assessment of, analysis of COVID-19 has had a negative impact on the impossibility of contract, or it's just the fact that contract has been hard to perform. However, it is being capable of performance of contract. Performance of contract would mean that you fulfill the obligations of the contract, like whatever is written A, B, C. If you're doing A, B, C, then the contract is being performed, right? So this is how the analysis will go in. Now, just coming, this is just back to basics. Contract Act. Under the Contract Act, there is a section 56, which is on agreement to do impossible act. Let's just read it. An agreement to do an act impossible in itself is void. Okay, so if I just tell you that you pluck the star for me and come back, and if you just say that you get 2 sons, I mean SUN, the sons for me, that is not possible, right? That act itself is not possible to do that. So an act itself, to do an act which is impossible to do, is void. Void meaning it cannot be done. It, before the court, it will be seen as null and void. Okay, so an agreement to do an impossible act in itself is void. Now, contract to do act which is afterwards becoming impossible or unlawful. So let's say if we enter into a contract, it was lawful, all the essential of contracts, offer, acceptance, consideration, object, everything was lawful, free consent, agreement was not void in the beginning. It basically was a valid and subsisting contract, right? Now, if afterwards some event happens which makes the contract impossible to do, which was unforeseeable, and the act was such that it was impossible for the contractor, for the party to the contract to perform, then it becomes void when the act becomes impossible or unlawful, right? Now let's just say for non-essential industries, like, again, I'm just repeating this example, however, that's what just strikes me in my mind, and that's what it says, that the garment industry, which right now is considered as non-essential as per the government lockdown order, there the factories are being shut. So how will the garment industry factory will fulfill their contracts if they're not able to manufacture the clothes? So this is how the impossibility of performance of contracts will play out in the contracts, and this is how the contract will become void. And because of COVID-19, this is what's going to happen in a lot of contracts. And a company, as you know, a company of a huge size will have 10,000s of contracts, like commercial contracts, distribution agreements, like supply agreements. They have entered into contracts with their raw material suppliers, vendors, customers, distributors, things like that, and agents. So they would have to analyze each and every term of the contract for each and every 10,000 of contracts to understand the impact of COVID-19 and whether the contract will be terminated or it will become void, or whether it will become just suspended or, you know, continue as it was. If you guys have any questions, just ask me, okay? I'm just going on to the next slide. You guys want me to do you guys have any questions on this slide? This is just getting you to understand what the contract essentials are, what is the applicable section on this impact is.
The thing is that we would be asking their doubts if you don't mind at a later stage, because it becomes, you know, then very noisy when we unmute everyone. So that is the reason. If it's fine with you, we can address their doubts later on.
Sure. All right. So then we'll just go back to the presentations and then solve their doubts. Okay, fine. So I'll just move on to the next slide. Now, we do the assessment of impact of COVID-19 on each of the contracts. So basically, it's just the steps of how the contract should be analyzed, how each of the contract is necessary to be analyzed. Definitely affected the performance of contracts in a lot of contracts. So this is how we'll analyze each of the contract to see if the contract is continuing, valid, subsisting, or terminated, things like that. So first question you see while you review that contract for this assessment is, has COVID-19 resulted in partial failure of performance, complete incapability to perform, or delays which, if extended beyond a tolerable limit, could strike at the root of the contract, or mere commercial hardship. So basically what it means is, first we need to see if the pandemic has resulted only in partial failure of performance, or if it's just that instead of doing A, B, C, you're doing A and B and not being able to fulfill C term of the contract. You also analyze whether the contract is going to be only delayed, the performance of the contract is going to be delayed, or if it is just that you are incurring mere hardship to perform the contract. Like, for example, contracts which are for essential items, like for milk, for bread, butter, things like that. Manufacturers are not able to find workers because some of their workers are quarantined, some of the migrant workers have left their villages, things like that have been happening. So the fact that they are facing mere commercial hardship for employees to manufacture those essential items is only the fact that they are only able to able to face hardships in the contract, and not the fact that it has become impossible for them to perform the contract, right? So this is what the analysis needs to be. Then you second interpret the force majeure clause under the contract. Now, under section 56, we've seen that the contract, when it becomes impossible to do, becomes void, right? Now there's another term for clauses of contract, which we see. Now, under the contract, there is always a force majeure clause. I mean, it generally is, it may or may not be present. However, it's upon the terms and conditions of the parties decided between the parties to include whether this force majeure clause is included in the contract or not. Now, what is a force majeure clause? Force majeure is an act of God. What do we do? I mean, what is an act of God? Now, act of God is certain events which are unforeseeable. It includes natural as well as man-made acts. Now, natural act over here could mean tsunami, earthquake, floods, landslide. Now, if your factory has been built on a mountain and there's a landslide where your factory is, there is a damage to a substantial amount to the factory and the employees. This is what force majeure would mean. It's an act of God. It's an unforeseeable event. It's basically, you cannot predict that it is happening, right? Flood, for example. Of course, now meteorological department and weather climate sector is always predicting things for us. However, sometimes they don't, and many of the times they don't. The fact that act of God uh, happens, and then business continuity again gets interrupted. So that would amount to act of God, which would mean natural forces as well as man-made acts. Now, man-made acts would include strikes and lockouts of a factory. Now, let's say for a trade union, there has been a strike in the factory. Again, our business, the manufacturing gets stopped. So this is how you're not able to fulfill the contract. So again, that's what act of God would also include. It renders the performance of the contract impossible to perform. So basically, that's how your contract is impossible to perform because factory workers have gone on a strike. So this is how force majeure kicks in. Now, applicability of force majeure to either suspend the contract or terminate it. Now, under contracts, parties include force majeure, and they are free to contractually agree that if in case of a force majeure happens and you're not able to fulfill the contract, you either suspend it or you terminate it. Okay, this is entirely dependent on the terms of the contract. So if a contract says that in case of a flood, you suspend the contract for 30 days or for 45 days. Okay, so you have to fulfill the fact that your terms are being complied with. There is a flood first, and force majeure is not very, drafted very narrowly. It's always drafted in a manner that, it includes everything which is unforeseeable and which is impossible to predict. That's how the lawyers come into picture while drafting the force majeure clause, where they need to skillfully write each and every act which is impossible to perform because of an act of God. It's not just that you can write that in case of an act of God, you fulfill, your contract is suspended. So that is not how it works. We need to draft it skillfully and include certain scenarios. For example, now in the deals that we are working, force majeure contract clause has been drafted in a manner to include specifically a pandemic, so as to exclude this impact of COVID-19. So that's how applicability of force majeure is. Now, suspension versus termination will entirely depend on the contract clauses to see if force majeure would amount to suspension of contract or termination, because that's entirely dependent on the contractual terms. So we need to read to see if the contract amounts to suspension or whether it amounts to termination. Suspension would mean it's only suspended for some amount of time, and afterwards it will be continued. Termination would mean that it will get terminated, then you renegotiate, or then you come into a new terms and conditions. So things like that. Now, fourth thing is Ministry of Finance has issued a notification for at least government contracts where government of India or state government are parties to say that wherever you are in the force majeure clause is under government contracts, you invoke it and suspend the contracts. So this is what the Ministry of Finance has directed the government companies and the state governments to say, that in case you have entered into a contract, and now contracts with government would be generally for construction, for engineering, procurement and construction, which is what is coming under the project finance teams of law firms. That's what the other teams do, infrastructure and project finance teams do. The government contracts negotiations, so things like that. I'm just letting you know that there exists also another team with law firms that is project finance and infrastructure. So this is what the Ministry of Finance has come, at least with respect to the government contracts, and this is not applicable to the private and commercial contracts which we enter into with private companies or public companies, or companies for that matter. It's only applicable to the contracts where government is a party. Again, now, does your contract offer a remedy? If, let's say, for example, if force majeure clause is absent, then your section 56 comes into picture, where section 56 says that your contract, when it becomes impossible to perform, becomes void. However, there is a catch here. force majeure clause and the contractual terms and conditions will always prevail section 56, because section 56 there also you have to prove the impossibility of performance. So it's not like we have section 56 to the rescue and it's going to be fine that either we suspend it. Is not a mandatory section where it says that your contract will get void if the the contract is impossible to perform. You will only have to prove the impossibility of performance to avail the benefit of section 56. So basically you will have to prove the fact that because of COVID-19 I was not able to perform the contract at all. It's not just the hardship. Again, it's not just the hardship, it is the impossibility of performance. So if parties agree that a party shall compensate the other despite of applicability of force majeure, contract terms will prevail over section 56. Okay, so this is also what I covered earlier, which says that if parties agree in the contract that a party, a non-defaulting party will compensate the other despite the applicability of force majeure. That's what is written in the contract. Let's say for that instance, A is entering into a contract with B and A says that I'm going to supply you with garments, and B says, okay, I'm going to pay 100 rupees for you for supply of garments every month. Irrespective of whether you supply 10 goods, 100 goods, at least minimum amount I'm going to pay 100, and just to avail your services, and per cloth I'm going to pay X amount. Okay, so 100 rupees is the minimum annual performance, minimum monthly performance that he's getting. Right now, let's say since COVID-19 has happened, A is not able to fulfill its contract because the employees, the factory is shut, everything has happened. So B says, of course, for the per cloth, I'm not going to pay you. However, it was written in the contract, since I'm going to pay this minimum monthly amount, I will have to pay at least that 100 rupees to you. So if your contract says that you will compensate the other despite the applicability of force majeure, your contract will prevail over section 56. A contract can also require requirement of notice to be given to the other party, that saying that a force majeure is triggered on occurrence of an event under the force majeure clause. So commercial lawyers, M&A lawyers always draft this in a manner saying that if in case of an act of God or force majeure, if that occurrence happens, you need to send a notice to the other party within, let's say, X days of impossibility of performance, informing them that I'm not able to fulfill the contract. So then we agree to a renegotiation and things like that. So this is how the notice requirement also arises from the contract, and we will have to deliver notices to the other party to say that we are not able to perform the contract. Okay, so this was one interesting article which I came across day before yesterday, that Oyo hotels, as we know, I'm just going to explain you the business model or the structure model of the company Oyo. Oyo Rooms, what it does is, the website Oyo Rooms has tie-ups with hotels. Let's say very, very small hotels who were not able to revive their business because of the fact that awareness nahi tha, or basically the fact that you were not aware of the hotel, so unpopularity. So hotels, very small hotels, tied up with the platform Oyo, and Oyo said, okay, let me take pictures of the room, hotels, restaurant that you have in the hotel, and I'm going to upload it and brand it as Oyo Rooms. So this was the contracts which were entered by Oyo and each of these hotels. So let's say, example, Hotel A and Oyo has entered into a contract. Oyo said, okay, I'm going to take pictures of your hotel and rooms, and I'm going to publish it on my website. And Hotel A also agreed, saying that how many ever rooms you book through Oyo, Oyo will get certain commission on the rooms that you book, right? So each of the rooms that you book through Oyo website, the hotel will get certain amount of commission, which is very less, and OYO will get majority of the commission because it has given you customers, right? So that is the structure model of OYO, and that's how OYO works. Now, OYO has recently just day before yesterday, so this is a very fresh news which is being circulated. OYO has invoked force majeure clause on hotel owners, saying that now OYO, what the contracts were is that OYO is going to charge minimum annual amount from the hotel owners, irrespective of whether the rooms are vacated, the rooms are occupied. So they are going to basically charge a minimum amount on just for the listing of hotels on the website. So and OYO will also give certain amount to the hotel owners for their renovations and things like that. So OYO has invoked force majeure clause on hotel owners. So this is what the question is, whether it will be applicable or not. I mean, whether force majeure over here will be applicable over here or not, because OYO, without analyzing the contracts for each of the hotel owners, have said that we are going to invoke force majeure and the contract will stand suspended, and that's how you will renegotiate with us. This is what is giving them the opportunity to renegotiate the terms, so that this is how cleverly OYO has done on hotel owners. However, hotel owners are contesting that we are incurring huge losses. No room is reserved right now, and this is how we're incurring huge losses. So we are not able to pay the certain amount which we were. This is how the contracts have been, renegotiated, and only after analysis of each of the contract with hotel owners, I'm sure they will have a standard contract with each of the owners to understand that first whether this would amount to a force majeure in this case or not. So in case there is a minimum amount which is applicable, irrespective whether it's whether there is a force majeure or not, you will have to pay, and hotel pay only a certain amount of cut for each of the hotel owners for listing of their websites, listing of the hotel owners' pictures, and this is how the contracts will have to be analyzed for OYO. So this was one live news that I came across, and this was one live instance that was being circulated in the news. Are there any questions?
Any doubts you people have, please ask, ma'am. Anybody has any
You
question?
can ask me any questions on corporate and M&A, or this presentation, or let's say on contracts, anything.
Mansi, you had some question, right? Mansi, unmute yourself. You are not audible to us.
Hello, ma'am. My question to you is that I'm a merchant from country A, and I have contracted a person from a country B. So after some time, I have fulfilled my obligations towards him, and suddenly the situation arises of war waging, and there's a war going on between us in our country, from country A and country B. So I want him to enforce the contract, but that person said that just because of the war, you cannot enforce the contract. And there was a clause of arbitrary action, which was mentioned in our contract. So how can I enforce that contract by with the help of suppose ICC or LCIA?
Right. So under our contract act is also there is a provision that for war waging, when you've entered into a contract where war is going on in another country, there the contract will be unenforceable. So unenforceable in the case of eyes of law would mean that it cannot be enforced. However, since it's a country which you've entered into a war with, that at that point of time you cannot enforce it. However, once the war is over, there is a clause on there is a provision under the contract act which says that it becomes impossible for you to perform because of operation of war. Then it becomes unenforceable. However, once the war is over, the contract can be, of course, enforced. However, the arbitration clause will need to be looked at, and then we'll have to see how the arbitration clause, plays into picture, and then seat and venue of the arbitration will also have to be seen, whether it, if it's LIAC or SIAC, anything. So we just have to see that to enforce the contract on arbitration or dispute resolution, as the case may be, under the contract.
Okay, ma'am, one more thing. There's one more situation that there's a person whom I contacted, like we are in a contract, and the same situation, I'm from country A and that person is from country B. But the person, he is he's resident of country B, but his business is somewhere else, like a country C or somewhere. But then he take that, he is residing in that country, but the main office is at London or somewhere else, and we still have the arbitration clause that if a dispute arises, we will go to another fourth country for the same. So can I enforce the same thing in the same situation when the person, the business is somewhere else, but the person is resident of the another country?
So that's a very good question, Mansi. One thing is that I just want to clarify the facts. One thing is we are residing and one party is residing in India, right?
I'm residing in India. The other person
and the second person is residing in country A, let's say, and their business is in country B, and you have chosen a country for enforcement in country C. That's correct.
Actually, ma'am, the business is going on in country C because his business in country C, I have contacted him for the business. So literally the business is going on a country A and country C. But the person who is resident of country B, there is a war between country A and country B. So my business is within country A and country C, but that person is still denying that because of their country situation, he cannot enforce the contract, which is in between country A and country C.
Okay, and you have chosen the seat and venue for dispute resolution in country D. That's another country altogether, right?
Yes.
So under the CPC, which is, I'm just assuming that your enforcement will be from an Indian law perspective because you are a resident of India, and this is how your Indian laws will be applicable, at least as far as your enforcement of contracts or enforcement of agreements will come into picture. Your section 9 of CPC will come into picture, where it talks about the jurisdictions of courts, how the jurisdictions will play out. Now, under section 9 of CPC, it says that your contract, the jurisdiction of courts will depend entirely on the contract. However, if it is not decided, then it is basically first where the principal business is, where the principal act has happened. So basically, your country, whatever, where the act happened, where will we need to be looked at. Then secondly, where the defendant resides. That's what the second clause is under section 9 of CPC. Whether the country where defendant resides, you need to look at that if you are able to enforce it in that country. Now, since you're saying that the country A and country C are,
just a second. I would,
war,
Mansi,
that time we'll also
Mansi,
have to look at. Yes, sir?
ma'am, sorry for interrupting you. Mansi, please mute everyone except ma'am and yourself. If we'll have further doubts, the person can raise their hand because there is so much noise going on from other participants. So please mute everyone else.
Yes, sir.
So can you
Soumya
hear?
ma'am, please,
Yeah.
please continue now.
So, as I said, under Section 9, there is provision on enforceability of for at least jurisdiction of court. So we see the Section 9 to, since we are bound by Section 9 as citizens of India, we are bound by Section 9 of CPC. So we will see the court which we can enforce the agreement in. So first it says that where the jurisdiction of the court where the principal act of business is. So, for example, if it's in country A, which is not possible right now because of war going on, that is not possible. Then second is where the defendant lives, where the defendant resides. That's where country B comes into picture. And if you've totally contractually agreed the fact that we are going to do it in country C and there is no arbitration, there's nothing, and its only exclusive jurisdiction is on country C, then since it is on war that time, then that will also not be enforceable. So we will have to wait for the war to get over or enforce their arbitration the way it has been worded in the arbitration clause. We'll have to look at that, and then we'll have to see whether arbitration can be enforced or not.
Okay, ma'am.
But until the war is over, we cannot. And that's what clearly the Contract Act read with CPC also says. Apart from that, I mean that is what the statute says, and that's why we are bound to CPC. So we'll have to look at the applicability of Indian laws on us. However, contractually it can also be agreed. Again, in addition to that, there are certain countries where your contract cannot be enforced at all. Like there are lists of countries which are given. So there the contract cannot be enforced. So that will also have to be seen in mind while you are entering into a contract with a person who is in such a country.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Mansi, please unmute Rachit. He has certain doubt.
हेलो मैम।
हाय
मैम अभी आपने एग्जांपल बताया ओयो रूम्स का, उन्होंने फोर्स मेजर अप्लाई किया, पर जो कोविड-19 की सिचुएशन है इसमें तो कोई एक्ट ऑफ गॉड नहीं लगता क्योंकि ये ह्यूमन से ही स्प्रेड हुआ है, तो इसमें फोर्स मेजर कैसे एप्लीकेबल?
Right, that's a very valid question on force majeure. Now the thing is, this pandemic, ये जो pandemic हुआ है पूरा COVID-19 का, this whether COVID-19 amounts to your force majeure or act of God or not is what has to be seen under the contracts. एक एक contract को देखना पड़ेगा the way it has been worded. Now force majeure does not only include act of God. I mean, act of God is a very synonymous term which is given to force majeure, but it also includes man-made acts like lockout, like strikes. So strikes and lockouts are decided by trade union, and they come up to the factory management and say that we are going on a strike because you have to increase your wages. तो हमें आप अपना right दो और उसके बाद ही हम अपना काम करेंगे. So this is how your contracts will come. The force majeure comes into picture, and force majeure is generally drafted in a manner उसमें बोलते हैं कि where such an event happens that it renders the defaulting the party, either party to the contract, to fulfill the contract obligations. That's how your force majeure condition kicks in, and then you have to inform the other party by way of a notice कि force majeure हुआ है, we are not able to fulfill the obligations. It is impossible to do the obligations. तो यही difference है, where it is impossible or where it is hardship is being given. तो अगर अभी आप एग्जाम्पल लो एक let's say for phone manufacturing industry, ठीक है, फोन मैन्युफैक्चर कर रहे हैं, देयर आर वर्कर्स, अभी सडनली गवर्नमेंट का लॉकडाउन सिचुएशन ऑर्डर आता है वेयर इट सेज क्लियरली सेज कि नॉन एसेंशियल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडस्ट्रीज फैक्ट्रीज विल बी शट. अब इसका मीनिंग ये हमने इंटरप्रेट, ये हमने फोर्सी नहीं किया था. वी ऑलवेज न्यू कि ये मैनमेड पैंडेमिक जो हो रहा है वो एक कंट्री से दूसरी कंट्री में फैल रहा है. हाउएवर इंडिया में वो बहुत लेट आया एंड पीपल हैड ऑलरेडी स्टार्टेड प्रेडिक्टिंग. हाउएवर इतना इम्पैक्ट ना तो गवर्नमेंट ने दिखाया पहले कि ट्रैवल बैन हो गए, बहुत पहले तो नहीं हुआ, मतलब अभी हुआ है 15 days पहले. इट्स नॉट लाइक कि एक महीने पहले से हो गया था. व्हेन चाइना में तो नवंबर से है. तो दिस इज हाउ पीपल वर प्रेडिक्टिंग. बट इन केस ऑफ ये कोविड अगर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग इंडस्ट्री देखेंगे तो गवर्नमेंट लॉकडाउन ऑर्डर विल एक्ट एज अ अनफोर्सिबल इवेंट. अनफोर्सिबल इवेंट क्यों? क्योंकि आई मीन प्राइम मिनिस्टर नरेंद्र मोदी आते हैं 9 बजे, बोलते हैं कि 12 बजे से सब शट हो जाएगा, and this is how your unforeseeable event comes into picture, where it says, where the government order has said कि आपके non essential items will be shut. तो ये unforeseeable हो गया. This is what the contract has rendered impossible to perform. अब आपके phone manufacture नहीं हो रहे, तो अब आपको contract या तो suspend करना पड़ेगा या terminate करना पड़ेगा, जो भी उस contract के अंदर लिखा हुआ. So this is how pandemic, the COVID-19 has amounted to force majeure in certain situations, I would say. Now, दूसरी situation इसमें आ रही है कि bread butter. Now, bread butter तो essential items हैं और उसमें manufacturing चालू है. All the essential items, दाल, pulses, सब कुछ, मतलब trading of vegetables, सब कुछ चालू है. All that is running up and running. Workers नहीं मिल रहे, ये problem है. Hardship आपको face करनी पड़ रही है, ये problem है. लेकिन impossible नहीं है वो perform करना. So this is how your force majeure will come into picture.
पर अगर मैम कोई ऐसी सिचुएशन है कि एक बिल्डर है, हमने उसके यहाँ से रेंट में कुछ, मतलब जैसे करंट सिचुएशन लिया जाए, तो अगर हम लाइब्रेरी ऑन कर रहे हैं, उसके यहाँ से रेंट में लिए हैं बिल्डर के यहाँ से, एक मतलब प्रॉपर हॉल है, कल को वो कह दे कि यहाँ पे फोर्स मेजर अप्लाई होता है, पर यहाँ मेरे लिए मेरे प्रोस्पेक्ट में तो इम्पॉसिबिलिटी है क्योंकि लाइब्रेरी तो बंद हो चुकी है, उसमें बच्चे भी नहीं आ रहे हैं, तो हमारा रेंट देना और बाकी एक्सपेंसेस जो कवर करना हमारे लिए तो इम्पॉसिबल है.
Correct, and that's a very valid point. Everyone in the country, for at least the commercial lessors, which I would say, commercial establishment, जो offices, जो हम लोग जहाँ पे offices में बैठते हैं, जहाँ पे लोग lease पे लेके रहते हैं, जहाँ पे offices हैं basically, not just homes. Homes का तो अलग ही बात है, but commercial establishment जहाँ पे सारे offices वो करते हैं, run करते हैं, वहाँ पे the force majeure clause, whether it will be applicable or not, will have to be seen under each of the agreements. So agreement, if it says that it becomes impossible to perform the contract, now the lessor is not able to stay in that that place. However, the thing is that lessee, ये lessor ने तो दे दिया है अपना contract, दे दिया है अपनी जगह. However, lessee is not able to occupy that area. So it's on the hardship of the lessee, which why he's not able to occupy that area, not on the lessor, because lessor is their obligation was to give you that area. हमने आपको अपनी जगह दी थी, आपको जो करना है करो, आपको ऑक्यूपाई करना है करो, आपको साथ मतलब ये 365 days नहीं रहना, आप मत रहो. However, what I have done is I have given you my property. Lesser तो अपना condition बताएगा ही, sorry, lessee तो अपना condition बताएगा ही, where they say that we are not able to occupy that property. तो उसकी वजह से हम hardship face कर रहे हैं. However, it is not impossible to perform, right? So that's why again we just have to see the impossibility versus the hardship which are going to be faced, and this is how your force majeure will be analyzed कि उस condition में वो applicable होगा या नहीं. Any other questions?
Amal, please take over.
Okay, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for enriching us with such knowledge. Now I would invite Seanshi Yadav to propose vote of thanks.
Thank you, Amar. Good afternoon, everyone. I am honored and happy to have got the opportunity to propose a vote of thanks on this very day. Firstly, I express my sincere gratitude to Ms. Soumya Bhargava ma'am for sparing her valuable time by giving us knowledge in abundance and agreeing on such a short notice for delivering the session in this time of crisis. I would even thank Dr. Nishant Joshi sir, in charge of Department of Law, Prestige Institute of Management and Research, for giving his immense support for making this webinar a reality. I would even thank all our faculties and administration authority for extending their great support in execution of this section. A big thanks to our faculty coordinator, Mr. Arjit Pandey sir, without whose vision, mission and execution this webinar would have not been possible. A sincere and heartfelt thank you to all the participants, our students, is that you all for attending this session and for cooperating with us at this time of crisis. I must not forget to thank all the students who have volunteered and worked so hard for implementation of this webinar. Last but not the least, thank you to everyone who has helped directly or indirectly in making this session a grand success. Take precaution and stay indoor and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody. I hope you found this webinar quite interesting and helpful.
Definitely, ma'am, and thank you so much for like enlightening all of us and all our students and accepting our invitation for taking this session. It was really we are really thankful to you at this time of crisis, and I hope even you had some good experience enlightening our students. So really thankful to you.
Thank you. Of course, it was very interesting to interact with the students.
Mansi, please end the meeting. So we are ending the meeting, everyone. Thank you once again for attending the session. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.